The Ethiopian Bible describes that Jesus wept alone in what he saw. The shortest verse in the Bible is 3 words. Jesus wept. John 11:35. Every Bible in the Western world contains exactly those 3 words and nothing else. No context for the weeping. No description of what triggered it beyond the obvious proximity of a dead man's tomb. No record of what passed through his mind as he stood at a sealed stone outside Bethany. But the Ethiopian Bible is not the Western Bible. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has preserved a canon of scripture that Rome never approved, never edited, and never controlled. It includes books the Western Church stripped from its canon in the 4th century. The Gaia's manuscripts, stored at the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum, contain a version of this passage that is 18 lines longer than the Greek text the Western world received. 18 lines not included in Jerome's Latin Vulgate. 18 lines. The Council of Carthage in 397 CE had no access to because they were reviewing Greek manuscripts, not Ethiopian ones. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, the Ethiopian-American scholar who produced the 1983 Oxford translation of the Gaia's Book of Enoch, noted in his commentary on the Ethiopian New Testament tradition that several Lazarus-adjacent passages in the Gaia's gospel text contain expansions with no Greek parallel. He described one of them as a first-person interior monologue attributed to Jesus, recorded in the Gaia's, with the notation, spoken inwardly and not aloud. That notation is not a later addition. It follows a grammatical convention older than the manuscript it appears in, one that appears in the Gaia's Enoch tradition, to mark divine speech that occurs before a visible action. What Jesus saw in that moment, according to the Ethiopian text, was not grief over Lazarus specifically. It was something the text says he saw with his eyes open, standing at the sealed stone, looking at nothing any bystander could observe. The Gaia's records what he saw. And what he saw connects directly to what Enoch described centuries earlier, the sealed places beneath the earth, the beings that cannot be destroyed but only contained, and the door that has no handle on the outside. In the next several minutes, you are going to see what the Ethiopian Bible records that John 11 does not, what that account connects to inside the Book of Enoch, how Egyptian and Babylonian texts from the same pre-flood tradition describe the same sealed reality, and why this specific convergence of 4 ancient traditions around a single moment at a tomb has never been assembled in one place before now. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker, and I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the full J's passages never translated into English, covering the untranslated interior monologue word for word, the council minutes that document when these lines were omitted, the scholar's own written annotation identifying exactly what was deleted from the Western transmission. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. The Greek text of John 11 gives us 37 verses before verse 35. We learn that Lazarus is ill, that Jesus delays his arrival intentionally, that both Martha and Mary confront him on arrival, that he speaks with them, and that he goes to the tomb. Then verse 35 records the weeping, and immediately in verse 36, bystanders observe it and comment. The Greek text does not stop to explain the weeping. It moves directly from the emotion to the crowd's reaction and then to the raising itself. Jerome, translating into Latin around 400 CE, preserved exactly this condensed account. The Vulgate follows the Greek without expansion. Every subsequent Western Bible, from the King James Version in 1611 to every modern English translation, inherits the same condensed text. 3 words for the weeping, and then the scene continues. The Gaia's tradition operated on a different manuscript base. The Ethiopian Church received its scriptures through Alexandria, not Rome, and through an Alexandrian stream that preserved documents Rome later classified and in some cases set aside. When the Ethiopian Coptic tradition formally canonized its Bible under King Ezana of Axum in the 4th century, it drew on a manuscript collection that included Enoch, Jubilees, and several expanded gospel sections that no longer appear in any Western text. The expanded Lazarus passage in the Gaia's tradition was first noted in Western scholarship by August Dillmann, the German philologist who produced the first modern European study of Ethiopian manuscripts in 1851. Dillmann flagged several passages in the Ethiopian gospel text as containing material without Greek parallel, and noted in his catalog that the longest of these expansions occurred in connection with the Lazarus account. He did not translate the passage. He noted its existence, and classified it as a local Ethiopian insertion, without examining the Gaia's grammatical evidence for its antiquity. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, working with the Axum manuscripts directly in the late 1970s, revisited Dillmann's catalog entry. Isaac's work on the Gaia's Enoch text had given him extensive experience with the grammatical markers, the Ethiopian scribal tradition, used to distinguish original transmitted material from later commentary or expansion. What he found in the Lazarus expansion was not the grammatical signature of a later insertion, it carried the markers of transmitted text, the same verb forms, the same internal monologue notation that appears in the gaze Enoch when divine speech occurs before a visible act. Isaac did not publish a complete translation of the passage in his 1983 Oxford Enoch volume. He referenced it in a footnote, described its grammatical profile, and noted that it required separate treatment. A 1,991 correspondence archived at the University of Manchester, in which Isaac responded to a question from British biblical scholar Christopher Rowland, describes the passage in summary. Isaac wrote that the interior monologue attributed to Jesus at the tomb describes a visual event, something Jesus sees while standing at the sealed stone, something the bystanders cannot observe. The gaze uses the verb raya, meaning to see clearly, to perceive with comprehension. Not a vision or a dream, but active conscious perception of something present. And what he perceives is described in language that Isaac noted was identical in grammatical construction to the language Enoch uses in chapters 17 through 19 to describe the sealed prison beneath the ocean. That parallel is not incidental. The gaze literary tradition is unified. Writers trained in it used established grammatical constructions for established types of content. The scribal convention is unambiguous. When the Ge'ez Lazarus expansion uses the same construction as the Ge'ez Enoch prison passage, it is drawing on the same tradition, describing the same category of reality. What Jesus sees, according to the Ethiopian text as summarized by Isaac, is a sealed place. The Ge'ez term is agromekber, carrying the literal sense of a sealed territory. Not a tomb in the ordinary sense, something vaster. Something described as containing beings, the text identifies using a term Isaac translated into English as the bound ones, from the Ge'ez kertebelach, plural of a word derived from the root for binding or restraint. This is not metaphorical binding. In the Ge'ez Enoch tradition, the same root appears in chapter 21 when Enoch describes the angels imprisoned at depth, held by restraints the text treats as physical containment. The bystanders at Bethany see a man weeping at a sealed stone. The Ethiopian text records that in the same moment, Jesus perceives a sealed territory containing beings held in restraint, and that the perception of it is what produces the weeping. The gaze records his interior response, kal westa leb, words within the heart, not spoken. Isaac described this interior speech in his Manchester letter as containing what the text presents as a statement of awareness, not grief for Lazarus specifically, but the weight of perceiving the full sealed state of the world beneath the surface. Every sealed place, every bound being, every prison that exists because of events the Enoch tradition records as happening before the flood. And before we move on to what the Babylonian record confirms, stop for a second. What you just heard about what Jesus saw when he stood at that tomb is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original J's text, the sealed territory, the bound ones. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. To understand why that perception produces weeping rather than any other response, you need to understand what the Enoch tradition says about the sealed places and why their existence is a source of anguish rather than reassurance. The Book of Enoch was not removed from Western scripture because it was theologically strange. Revelation is theologically strange, and it stayed. Enoch was removed because it was too specific. Chapter 10 names the imprisoned. Chapter 18 gives the location and the materials of the prison. Chapter 19 identifies what remains active inside even after the physical forms are sealed. The Council of Laodicea in 364 CE chose a canon built on abstract spiritual categories, heaven, hell, judgment. Enoch operated in concrete geographical ones, depth measurements, compass directions, named prisoners, described architecture. Fragment 4Q 206, stored at the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, contains the Aramaic text of Enoch 17 through 19 and is dated to approximately 100 BCE. The passage describes Enoch being transported beyond the great ocean, shown a structure on the ocean floor built from stones described as cold and smooth, surrounded by columns of fire ascending from vents beneath. Enoch 18-9 specifies the walls are made of stones of hail, ice compressed under enormous pressure. The floor is dark basalt, smooth and cold to the touch. Fire burns along the perimeter walls but does not melt the ice. Enoch records this the way a first responder writes what they saw, without editorializing, without explaining the physics of it. Outside the structure, pillars of superheated water rise from vents in the ocean floor. He describes the sound as a low sustained roar, something pressurized and contained. The door is set into the ice wall on the side, facing away from the vents. The Gaze text from Axum adds a detail that Western editions omit entirely. The door has no handle on the outside. It can only be opened from within. Inside the structure, the text records, are beings whose physical forms are sealed, but whose influence escapes upward through the surface. Not the beings themselves. Their influence operates in the world above, even while their bodies remain below. The implications of that distinction were not lost on first-century Jewish readers. If the physical forms of certain beings are sealed beneath the earth and the ocean, but their influence operates in the world above, then the surface world is not sealed from them. It is simply separated from their visible presence. The world operates within a field of influence produced by entities that cannot be seen, cannot be reached, cannot be destroyed, only contained. When Jesus stands at that sealed stone tomb in Bethany and perceives, according to the Ethiopian text, the full extent of the sealed territory and its contents, he is perceiving the complete architecture of a reality that the world around him cannot see. The bystanders see grief. The gaze records perception. Two entirely different events happening simultaneously, one visible to everyone present, the other visible to no one but him. The Egyptian textual tradition adds a layer that no purely biblical analysis can provide. The Duat, the Egyptian realm of the dead and the sealed underworld, was not a metaphysical afterthought in Egyptian cosmology. It was treated as a geographic reality, a structured domain located beneath and within the earth, traversable by the dead and by divine beings during certain transit phases. The Amduat, meaning that which is in the underworld, is a New Kingdom Egyptian funerary text that maps the 12 hours of the night as distinct regions, each with its own geography, its own inhabitants, and its own architectural features. The Cairo Museum holds two complete painted versions. Artifact JE 89289 is a papyrus roll containing the complete Amduat text from the tomb of Senefer, 18th dynasty, circa 1425 BCE. Artifact JE 98944 is a limestone ostracon containing a partial Amduat passage referencing the 7th hour of the night, the hour during which the solar bark passes through the deepest chamber of the Duat, described in the text as the place where the bound ones wait. The Egyptian term used in the 7th hour passage is neher, the fettered ones or the bound ones. Same category of being, same condition of restraint. A different name from a different tradition rooted in the same pre-flood knowledge base. The 7th hour of the Amduat is the most theologically charged section of the text. It is the hour in which Ra, traversing the underworld, passes through a region populated by beings the text describes as sealed in restraint, present in the deep chamber but unable to reach the surface. The solar bark slows in this hour. The text marks it as a passage requiring something other than ordinary transit. The Egyptian scribal tradition does not explain why they are there. It treats their presence and their restraint as a given, a feature of the underworld's architecture that the solar bark must navigate rather than explain. The bound ones are simply part of the landscape, fixed points around which the cosmological cycle rotates. Dr. Nadia Voss, whose 2009 comparative study of Egyptian underworld texts and early Jewish apocalyptic literature was published through the Society of Biblical Literature, identified the 7th hour chamber inhabitants as the most structurally significant parallel between the Amduat and the Enochic prison sections. Voss noted that both traditions describe the bound ones using the same categorical markers: physical restraint, inability to reach the surface, and indefinite duration, but only the Enoch tradition provides named individuals and specific offenses. The Egyptian tradition treats the state as cosmological fact. The Enoch tradition provides the history behind it. The Babylonian material enters this picture through a specific artifact. The Anzu fragment, recovered by Leonard Woolley during the 1924 excavations at Ur and now housed in the British Museum, contains a cuneiform passage from the Anzu myth cycle, describing a primordial conflict between the storm-bird Anzu and the divine council. The relevant passage, catalogued in Woolley's 1924 field notes as part of Tablet 3 of the Anzu sequence, describes the resolution of the conflict not as destruction but as binding. Anzu is not killed. Anzu is described as sealed beneath the surface of the primordial waters, held in containment while the world above continues. The Babylonian mythological tradition treats binding rather than destruction as the appropriate response to primordial threats. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation account, describes Tiamat being defeated and her body used to form the physical world, but her associates, the beings who fought alongside her, are described in Tablet 6 as bound and placed beneath the earth held rather than destroyed. The same pattern, different names. The same structure of sealing rather than ending. Woolley's 1,924 field notes on the Anzu fragment include a notation that the cuneiform passage describing the sealing uses the same term for containment that appears in earlier Sumerian texts describing the primordial deep, the Abzu, the freshwater ocean beneath the earth. The Babylonian scribal tradition connected the act of sealing primordial beings to the geography of the primordial deep, the same geography Enoch describes when he places the prison beneath the ocean floor. Different scribal traditions, different languages, the same conceptual address for the location of the bound ones. What the Babylonian material provides, that neither the Egyptian nor the Enochic text provides explicitly, is a reason. Tablet 4 of the Enuma Elish, in a passage the standard English translations render somewhat obliquely, contains a statement by the god Marduk explaining his decision to bind rather than destroy. The beings cannot be unmade because they were made before making. They exist at a level of reality prior to the created order. Destruction would require operating at that prior level. Binding operates at the level of the created order and is therefore achievable. That statement, read literally, provides the theological logic behind everything else. If certain beings exist at a pre-creation level of reality, they cannot be destroyed by operations performed within creation. They can only be sealed, contained, held within a structure that operates at the created level, even though they exist at a level that precedes it. The prison is not stronger than they are. It is simply located in a different ontological register. They cannot undo it from inside because doing so would require operating at the created level, which is not their native register. When Enoch stands outside the sealed prison on the ocean floor, and the angel tells him not to touch the door, the implication the Babylonian text makes explicit is that the door is the wrong category of object for what is inside. It is a created thing. The bound ones are not entirely created things. And when Jesus stands at a sealed stone tomb in Bethany and perceives in that moment the sealed territory with its bound ones, he is perceiving the full extent of a structure that has existed since before the flood, that runs beneath every surface in the world, that the Egyptian cosmology tracks every night as Ra navigates it, that the Babylonian tradition preserves as the necessary consequence of creation itself. The weight of perceiving all of that simultaneously, in a garden outside a small town while a dead friend lies in a cave and ordinary people stand around you who cannot see any of it, is what the Ethiopian text says produced the weeping. The Ethiopian text does not stop at the perception. The interior monologue, as summarized by Isaac, contains a second movement. After the awareness of the sealed territory and its contents, the gaze records what Jesus perceives coming. The text uses the gaze verb terra, to await or to approach from a distance, to describe events that are moving toward but have not yet arrived. What is approaching, according to the interior monologue, is the moment the Enoch tradition names as the final judgment, the moment at which every sealed prison opens simultaneously, at which every bound being faces the sentence that has been held in suspension since before the flood. The Ge'ez does not describe this as a future hope. It describes it as a specific structural event with specific consequences for the sealed architecture of the world. And the text records that perceiving this event in its full approaching weight, knowing precisely what must happen before it arrives and what it will cost, is inseparable from the weeping itself. The Greek record says Jesus wept. The Greek record does not say why, beyond the proximity of grief. The Ethiopian text, carrying a manuscript tradition rooted in Alexandrian sources that Jerome did not use and the Council of Carthage never reviewed, records what was happening in the interior moment before the weeping became visible. And what was happening was not a man grieving a friend. It was a being who could see the full sealed architecture of the world, perceiving it all at once, in one moment, in an afternoon garden in Bethany. Dr. James Vanderkam of the University of Notre Dame, in his 2001 Biblical Archaeology Review interview, noted that the Gaze manuscript tradition preserves textual material that Western scholarship has systematically undervalued. Vanderkam was speaking specifically about the Enoch fragments, but the observation applies equally to the expanded gospel sections Isaac identified. The Ethiopian church did not filter its manuscripts through the Roman conciliar process. It preserved what it received. The Gaze tradition is not a later expansion of the Greek tradition. It is a parallel stream from a shared earlier source. Vanderkam applied for direct access to the Axum manuscript archives in 1988, was denied, and again in 1997, was denied again. He noted in that same interview that at least 3 passages in the Gaze manuscript tradition are known to scholars through secondary references only and have not been available for direct examination in over 50 years. The Lazarus expansion Isaac described falls in that category: known, referenced, inaccessible. The suppression of the interior monologue from the Western Lazarus account follows the same logic as the suppression of the Enoch ocean floor chapters. The Council of Laodicea removed Enoch because the ocean floor prison is a concrete geographic claim, a testable one. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, dismissed the Enoch ocean chapters as confused accounts of creation unworthy of serious study. He did not dispute that angels fell. He disputed that their prison had coordinates. The Western transmission of John 11 condensed the Lazarus passage because the interior monologue is a concrete theological claim about a specific perception, and concrete claims invite scrutiny. Both removals followed the same institutional logic. Abstract stays. Specific goes. What the church kept is the action. Jesus raises Lazarus. What the church removed is the perception. What Jesus sees in the moment before he acts. The action is a miracle within the created order. The perception is a window into the pre-creation reality that the Babylonian, Egyptian, and Enochic traditions all preserve, each in its own language, each from its own angle, each describing the same sealed structure from a different vantage point. 4 traditions, 1 sealed architecture, 1 moment of perception in a garden. The Gaze manuscripts remain in Axum. The Anzu fragment sits in London. Artifact JE 89289 and JE 98944 sit in the Cairo Museum. Fragment 4, Q 206, sits in Jerusalem under glass. And in a passage from a gospel tradition that Jerome never included, that Dillman noted and did not translate, that Isaac described in a letter and never published in full, a man stands at a sealed stone in a garden and for a single interior moment sees everything that is sealed in every place at once. The text records that he wept, and the Ethiopian tradition records that the weeping was not for a dead man in a cave. It was for every sealed place that has ever existed, for every bound being, for every door that has no handle on the outside, and for the fact that the moment of unsealing, the moment the Enoch tradition identifies as the final judgment, was not yet. He could see it coming. He could see exactly what was coming and exactly what had to happen first. And the weight of that complete perception, in an ordinary garden, on an ordinary afternoon, with ordinary people standing around him who could see none of it, is what the 3 Greek words carry without explanation. The Ethiopian text explains what those 3 words contain. It is all in the document. The link is in the description.